Hello.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. It's a nice Tuesday. We had a holiday yesterday, so it's always nice to have a holiday and then get back to work.
Yeah, that's true. The weather here has kind of shifted to be cooler. I'm Wisconsin. I don't know where you're located, but we're starting to switch into the actual fall temperatures. So,
We are as well. We are as well. I'm just I'm in Canada, but outside of Detroit. So if you know where Detroit is, a little bit more east, but that's where we're located. So we also had a very, very fall day today. Yeah, tell me what's going on in math in your world.
we started our self-study a couple years ago, and I was fortunate. We have 4 elementary buildings in our district, and I was fortunate to pull a teacher per building, per grade level, to really analyze our data and what we're noticing. And then the next year, Wisconsin revised their standards. So we were able to revisit our learning targets and the progression of those targets, and really just have more conversation around content standards. We kind of left off last year with also revisiting math practice standards,
Mm-hmm.
and what good instruction should look like.
Okay.
So that pushed our teams into thinking about what resources would best support us in helping all teachers have a more in-depth understanding what math should look like.
Got it.
So we came to the conclusion of looking at Bridges 3rd edition and Illustrative Math 360 as our top 2 choices. Those teams really decided that collectively. So our plan was to pilot this school year, but due to ELA and Act 20 and all the changes in legislation, math got put on hold. And that's kind of where we're at. We can't pilot until the following school year. That being said, knowing we were in this process of moving towards full implementation of a new program, I was also trying to be proactive even last year. And I wrote a grant for how many teachers did it end up being? I want to say approximately 10 to 12 teachers and building principals. And that was focused on really best practice in math, those math teaching practices.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this small little group from that, and we partnered with UW-La Crosse on what those teaching practices look. Now, when you say that, that's 4 2-hour sessions. Right.
Okay.
So good stuff. But in terms of, tons of PD time, it's not like it was weeks upon weeks. Right.
Yeah.
So we do have some momentum going with that team. And our 3 building principals that were involved in that grant, they have building goals this year around one of those teaching practices. We have a little bit continuing. I think I'm concerned it's not enough to really, make change. I'm super excited to talk to you and get your thoughts on how I can.
So when you say like you're excited about the principles that made that part of their improvement goals, you're hoping what more like is your main problem, or I like to use the pebble, main pebble problem, the pebble rattling around in your shoe right now, would you say is that you're wanting more leaders to have the same kind of epiphany that these people had because they were part of the grant? And how do you do that when you don't have a grant? Or is there another pebble that's rattling around in your shoe?
I think the biggest thing is just kind of getting math on the table a little bit.
Uh-huh.
That I know our executive director of instruction just recently met with each building principal, and our math data isn't good.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like I've kind of been spinning my wheels for multiple years, but math has really taken a back seat consistently. So just getting that grant going last year, and now the fact that we have 3 principals that are on board and understand there's a need and an emphasis in math, are all good things. But I think at the end of the day, like I was looking through your workbook too and kind of going through that. But in 5 years or even 3 years, when we hit full implementation, would really love all teachers to understand what those best practices are and how to implement them in the classroom. And my goal with the principals being embedded in that grant was that in order to really help make change, our leaders really need to understand what good math looks like, as they're the evaluators in our classrooms and can help push and sustain that change. So that was the intention with the math grant, that it wasn't just teachers understanding it, but really our leaders also knowing what it looks like.
Completely agree. Completely agree. It's essential if you are after sustainable change in teacher practice to include and have alignment across the different levels of educators, administrators, teachers, parents, even students, right? We need alignment across what matters and the decision making process, which is like we have to bring those people into those sessions, and oftentimes they're missed, they're left out because of time, or we don't have, we can't pull away from our duties as administrators to engage in that work because there's so many other things to do. And what about all the subjects? Is it just math that gets the focus or not the focus? So I definitely applaud you for, getting that grant going. I think it was absolutely critical to have those administrators, and it moving forward, you're going to want to continue that process. It's like, how many more administrators can we bring into the fold, and and I think your pebble here is like, how do I do that more is probably right. Is like, how do I bring more leaders into the decision-making process? Is that, would you say, is a pebble? Keeping in mind that you also want, all your teachers to have these effective, like, know what the effective use of these practices look like in a few years' time.
Yeah, I would say so. Actually, all four of our elementary principals, I think, are on board and understand and want to do that. I think the biggest, so I'm not so concerned about administrators buying in as much as how do we really do that well in such little snippets of time or little opportunities to make an impact.
Yeah. What has the support looked like in the past? So I know you had a grant and you had 4 2-hour sessions, but what does it look like going into this year? Like if let's say for a moment we waved a magic wand and our administrators were all on board. They all have a clear vision of what mathematics is supposed to look like. They also are aligned in where the focus happens to be for this year and next year and say the third year. So let's say that was all aligned. What does support for teachers look like?
So this year, one of our buildings' goal is on productive struggle. Mm-hmm. And another building is doing use and connect math representations. Okay. And then the third building is doing elicit and use evidence of student thinking.
Okay.
So they're having teachers, we looked at NCSM has like a continuum, the shift continuum with explanations of what that looks like. Yep. So we're asking teachers in each of those buildings to self-reflect before they implement a task and on where they're at with that understanding. And then right now, principals have said about 1 task per quarter, which I'm not super thrilled about that. That seems like very little, but it is a starting point. So after a teacher implements a task with the thought around productive struggle, for example, they would then reflect in written form how that went. And then again, where are they at on the continuum? So they're using that. By the end of the year, they can see that each teacher made some growth in getting further along on the continuum.
What are you seeing from the teachers right now? Like, what having this in place right now is 1 task per quarter. What are you hearing from the teachers? What are you seeing when you're in the classrooms?
Well, so I would say it hasn't happened yet. So that's their building goal. And like one of the principals is not planning that they even do their first task until December. That would be the first time that they implement.
So what's happening in the meantime? What does classrooms look like now? Right now, it sounds like we're treating tasks as some event that we're going to bring in and do as like a showcase of something where it's exceptional, it's not normal, it's something that we're going to try, or it's just like we do this once in a while, and it's not actually like the thing we're doing on a regular basis. Like, what is math instruction supposed to look like? So what I was saying is like, what does math instruction look like right now? And if you're looking at your goal of having teachers understand what practices are supposed to look like in 3 to 5 years, what are we doing in the meantime to give them the glimpse that it's not just this like, hey, we just do this once every quarter, once in a while, but 8 effective teaching practices are designed to be like, these are things you were supposed to be doing regularly every day.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
all 8 every day necessarily.
Mhm.
And it's great that they're picking, like, I really like that they've picked one practice to focus on for the year. Like, I think that's a realistic goal, is to go, we're not going to worry about all of the 7, but we're going to look at this one, and we're going to make sure that we work on strengthening up here in this particular one. I really like that, because too many times administrators, coordinators focus on too many things. And when you focus on too many things, we always say is you're focusing on nothing, because you're giving too many things to a teacher, and they're like, I don't know which one is important. Is it that one or is it that one? And they have a hard time deciding that all of them are important. And we probably can embed all of them if we focus on one of them well. The other ones kind of fall into place anyway, because they're so interconnected. But so I like that they're focusing on one. But my wonder here is the message that we do this one thing once or a couple times a year, and that's it, and or is there a bigger purpose here, and are we actually aligned in what we think is important in math instruction, and what are we doing on a regular basis to improve this process or improve math instruction every day, and not just 3 times a year or 4 times a year.
Yeah, and I think that you're bringing up a really good point, that it's making it seem like it's this magic event that happens just a few times, and it's so big and so daunting that we can't ask you to do it more than 3 times a year, because
Right.
it'd be so impossible. That puts that in good perspective for me. They picked, I think, where it's only 3 times, and because of the reporting aspect of it,
Sure.
like that's when a teacher would actually self-reflect. But that's really good feedback. That helps me think about how do we message that, because I agree with you. I feel like this should be what our classrooms look like every day.
Like, if you think about productive struggle or connecting representations, there's nothing saying that you have to do a full-blown event task where it looks completely different to what we're already doing to engage students in those practices. They can be small, bite-sized chunks of your already existing time period. Do we want more of that than less of that? Sure. But when you have an army of teachers who maybe have not engaged in this type of, what does productive struggle look like? Or connecting like, if they're not sure what those lessons could look like, how do we help them? How do we help them embed components of their existing lessons so that they're working it in, and they can get more comfortable, instead of a full blown, hey, from start to end, this is a completely different experience, because the kids are going to pick up on that anyway, right? Like, it's kind of saying like, hey, we only do this once in a while, and the kids are like, what's going on here? And then it's completely disjointed from their normal experience. We've seen that it's not that effective. Like, teachers will self-sabotage, or they'll not take it seriously, because they're like, let me just get through this. Unless you've got teachers who are like actively excited about it coming, and they're spending a lot of time preparing for, say, this particular thing. And if that's the case, they're probably already embedding a bunch of the things in anyway to their lessons. What are the principals, or how are the principals? Do you know if the principals are saying using any sort of measurement? When I say measurement, it's like almost like an indicator that we have success or improvement, other than just waiting for the student data to show up.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's just those, we built a Google form on that continuum. So a teacher does have to like write a
Right.
written narrative. And then we talked about having a Likert scale for where do you fall on that continuum. So they would have to numerically pick, I'm a 2 right now, but by the end of the year, I'm an 8.
Okay.
looking at the continuum.
Do they have goals designed around those? Or is it just we just want to monitor?
The goals I think would be improved by at least 2 points on the Likert scale, I think is one of them.
Got it. Okay, so what does it look like to support those teachers during the year to like help them prepare, give them glimpses? Like if we're trying to on the Likert scale, move people down the line here. And I don't know, you said you were using the principles to action kind of sliding the continuum. What is it, what does it look like when a teacher is doing this? What does it look like when students are doing this particular practice? I assume that they're kind of self-assessing themselves along. Like I'm closer to this end of like what teachers are looking like in classroom than this. So what is happening during the year to help that teacher move themselves down the line?
So we have like one of the buildings already had a staff meeting in September, and I went and presented on productive struggle, and we had conversation around what it is and what it isn't. And I actually shared from the Productive Struggle book from John Sangiovanni, some of the ways to elevate task or just a math problem. Like part of me, it feels like maybe the word task is not the right word to say anymore. I was talking with UWL about this a little bit too, to your point of making tasks. Teachers will say, where do I get these tasks to me? Well, we can, like the problem 7 times 8 could be a really great task or a really great problem depending on what we're doing with it. So the different representations that kids come to the table and how we facilitate that conversation could be a great math conversation, and it doesn't have to be considered a task that we find in a book or on a website somewhere. So that made me think about that a lot. But so in the productive struggle meeting with that team or that building, we talked about here are problems that we already have existing in our lessons. And I gave them examples of here's one and then how we can change it. And then I gave them another one, the same strategy, create different representations was one of those strategies in the book. And then they had to, within that staff meeting, talk about how they would change the question that already exists in their lessons, so that it was based on kids are going to create multiple representations with that. So that was one of the buildings. Now, Prairie View, another of our elementary buildings, has 2 different staff meetings set up, and their goal is use and connect math representations. So they have a small team, 5 teachers that participated in the math grant. And we have it set up that they're going to share out and talk about the I'm going to use the word task that they implemented in their classroom, and then talk with the rest of the staff about what that looked like and how the use and connect representations followed with student work. They have, and then again, in I think it's January, or I can't remember the meetings, but 2 different staff meetings where that will happen. So 3 of the teachers in one meeting, 2 in the other, where there will be in a leadership role of presenting on use and connect. And I'll be there as support and help with that. Our 3rd building is a little wishy-washy. I don't really know what's happening right there or there right now. So I need to investigate and find out more.
Yeah.
So we have some staff meetings. We do have 3 early release times. So those are 2-hour each. And that's when UW Lacrosse is scheduled to come in and work with us. I actually plan with that team this Thursday, where we'll be talking about what did those windows look like to help all of us be moving in a good direction. My current thinking around the UWL times is around the 5 practices. So that all of those building goals and the building that doesn't have a math goal can relate to whatever problem we're doing. How do we keep thinking about anticipating student work, selecting, sequencing, monitoring, all of that?
Yeah, the 5 practices can be a great structure to help help align, but also help focus your efforts on, say, each of these practices, because you can be using the 5 practices to help obviously engage teachers with implementing productive struggle in their classrooms. And again, you can do small bursts of that. You can do a full lesson where it was 5 practices from start to end, or you can say do a mini lesson that way too. You can do it with connecting representations where you ended up, say, focusing on when you're doing your connect stage, like how are we connecting the representations that we're seeing in our classrooms, and then what particular model or strategy are we highlighting for the students to take away and practice and as they say what their particular learning goal is. So it's always a good kind of a great framework that you can embed those practices in, because it allows for those practices to come out more, say, than most other structures. It's so what I'm hearing is that we've got some goals. So we've got each site generally has goals. We've got principals who seem to be aligned with these goals as a priority. We've got support, and it sounds like some of the professional development that's happening, some of the support that's happening is always about refocusing towards these goals. We've got some measurement tools in place that helps kind of teachers align themselves to like knowing what success looks like. What does it look like? What does it sound like when I'm doing this particular practice well? These are all really important components of effective programming for mathematics. Some of the work that we do on a regular basis to support districts in creating what you've got. Is many districts don't have alignment across the schools that they're supporting. They don't have a math vision. They don't know that these are the 3 things that we want to support this year. So a lot of them don't have, say, a reason or a measurement tool outside of student data to go, are we making progress on the things that we think are important? You've got, even just a survey for teachers to continually reflect on that practice is important for them to do, as long as we're supporting them and understanding what that practice is supposed to look like. So it's quite likely that they read. So, this is something you might want to just check, because this is a great tool to have. As I say, most districts don't even have this tool, but the way we coach that using that particular tool would be the tool itself is fine for like kind of tracking, but the real power in a tool like that is creating actual alignment around what the practice, like when we say productive struggle, do we both know what we're talking about? Are we saying the same thing? Because when we use language around practices in the classroom, like you might say effective use of discourse in the classroom, but your teacher might have a completely different view of that than you do. Tool, when we have a self-assessment tool, the risk there is that we are speaking different languages. And so they give themselves a 10 or a 5, when you view it, you would give them a 2. And that's because they're saying, hey, I'm doing discourse well because I ask questions in class, but you know discourse means something different. So where the power of the actual tool comes in, as long as we're helping teachers understand the language of the tool and what it looks like when we're performing at 5 versus when we're performing at 1, that's the real power in creating alignment and structure, because you're helping them see the success criteria of like, these are effective practices and these aren't. This is what it looks like when we're doing the practice well. This is maybe what it might look like when we're not. So the descriptors are important, having them see what examples look like are important, experience lessons that feel like that are important. So using that tool to go, hey, at one of, let's say, those 2-hour release times, it's like, let's bring up, say, that self-assessment. Where would you mark yourself today on productive struggle? And then maybe part of that is unpacking what it would look like, what it doesn't look like. Here's a lesson, here's not a lesson, like the glimpses back and forth. So sounds like you've got that tool in place, which can be helpful. And then just structuring, are we supporting the use of that to actually get to the actual goal, which is alignment and also improvement in the use of, because it would be great when they say 5, it's actually 5. Like your assessment and their assessment match. That's the ultimate goal that you'd want to get. And that's usually the first thing you have to do before you actually see improvement on the actual scales. Because what's going to happen is they're going to give themselves 4 and 5s, but they don't know that they're really 2s and 3s. And then when you shrink the gap, they'll all of a sudden regress on the next time you use the tool. So it'll feel like you went backwards, but then you'll know that that's the actual reflection. Like these are the actual results. And then moving forward from there is real results. Sounds like you've got some of those things in place, which is great. I would say, and I haven't asked you this, but where the biggest, say, hurdle is we focus on the pedagogical moves, But we forget that teachers really need strength and practice and understanding in the mathematics component. So you've got a group that's focusing on connecting representations, which is great because it gets you a way to talk about pedagogical moves, but also like, do we know what happens when we're subtracting and the four different strategies of subtraction? Or do we know that there's two different types of division, and when do I use partitive and when do I talk about partitive and when do I talk about quotative, and how do I represent both of those? And what model do I use here and what model do I use there? Really, what happens is we focus on pedagogical moves like the 8 effective teaching practices because we all want to see it because it's easy to see these things. But the underlying where teachers don't move, like where we know that we've given them some glimpses or we've given them like, this is what it looks like, but we still aren't seeing it in the classroom is because you've got an army of teachers that learn math a very procedural way. Like I'm sure you did, like I did. And we had these epiphanies, these math epiphanies along the way that allowed us to feel more comfortable about stepping back and not reading the script or following the general teacher guide and going off book a little bit, which is exactly what's required when you do a 5 practices lesson or when you give students the freedom to productively struggle in your classroom. Is you have to be really strong with the math that you're going to see around the room and be able to weave that tail to get to the actual learning goal that you want and to be ready for all those things, which is a lot of flexibility on a teacher's end. In order to be flexible like that in the classroom, we have to really feel like we know the mathematics well because we're trying to create these connections and sense making for math. Usually that's what we're seeing is like, hey, we've got a great structure, a great plan to move these practices, but we're not seeing any change because you've got a lot of pieces that are great like you've got a lot of puzzle pieces that are in the right spots. But maybe you can speak to this, but how many times this year or last year did you say use those 2-hour release times to really like unpack a particular strand that's coming up or a mathematical concept so that the teachers could just feel comfortable with doing the math without translating it into a pedagogical move in the classroom? Mm-hmm. That's where we see some of the districts really start to flourish is when they really spend time there. And because once you spend time there and with the other things in place and you do that consistently for year to year, that's when you're going to start to see change.
Can I ask your suggestion on how do you build in the content time? I think some of the greatest professional development we've had are state math. It used to be called WISME, but now it's, I can't even think of the name of it, Wisconsin Math, whatever it is. But they have week-long progressions of learning for teachers. So you could attend in the summer an entire week, right. 40 hours of on a K2 operations and algebraic thinking domain, sure. And have the exact depth and really awesome conversations you're talking about. Over time, even the Math Institute, it's really gotten less and less and less because I think just the money and the funding and such in education to be able to send teachers to, that many days of training and that cost. Yeah, that people aren't even, doing it as much anymore. But so what does that look like? Or what do you feel like in other districts that has really been a great way to go about that?
Yeah, it's about being the constraints are different from district to district, school to school, right? It's but it's about deciding on, and this is where we come back to the vision and also the objectives that are we in agreement on what's important for mathematics? So we're not even just agreeing that mathematics is a priority, but we're agreeing that these 2 to 3 things are the priority of in mathematics. And one of those things probably should be strengthening teacher capacity for their understanding of math up. So building their own proficiencies around math. So when we agree that that's important, then it comes down to how are we utilizing our channels, our access to teachers so that we're always working towards strengthening those up. And then how will we know? So for example, you knew that these 3 components of pedagogy were important. You've got schools that are putting in monitoring or self-assessment to help kind of keep tabs on when we're measuring it. We're usually keeping it in the forefront. So this is a reason why you might have that survey in place for the pedagogical moves. But we also want to measure our growth on, say, the proficiencies as well. So the question is, when you think about, when I said before, it's like, well, what support is in place? It's like, now look at the support and go, can we use those structures, those channels, and steer parts of that, some of that time to giving teachers the experience of doing mathematics just to do mathematics, and then help them build their own confidence up. Because really, you can spend all your time on, say, what does it look like for productive struggle, or the 5 practices, right? You can give them the glimpse of the 5 practices, but again, they still need the math content before they can do it. They're not going to do it on their own unless they have that confidence that when they go to, say, do the multiplication, actually connect up. Like when I'm selecting and sequencing, do I even know what I'm looking for? And then also when I go to connect at the end, I'm going to weave this lesson. And do I know what my learning goal is? I should, because I plan that out in stage 1 or stage 0. And then do I also know what model or strategy I really want to highlight today, and why that fits in the bigger picture of the math content, which is a lot. That's a lot for a teacher to know. So usually, some of the other districts that we support, we've helped kind of structure what those look like, but we kind of like have done an audit. It's like, what is out there? Like, what have you done in the past? Tell us more about your coaching cycles. Some of them have coaches, some of them don't. Some of them have, on-site or in-school teachers that are, say, lead teachers. And how do we do a train the trainer model? And how do we get in more classrooms? So there's a variety of different things you can do. But it comes down to knowing that the priority is that. And then that kind of think of it like a waterfall technique. Whereas if you make content knowledge for a teacher the priority, then what happens is it just spills over into the pedagogy. Because if you focus on the pedagogical move first, like productive struggle, without focusing on the math content, sometimes a teacher will go realize on their own, in order for me to do this, I actually have to know the math inside and out. Therefore, I'm going to take the extra step on my own to dig into the math, just so I'm prepared to do it, because I have to be flexible here. If I'm going to have a great discussion about it, I have to know why that's a great discussion. I have to know which questions I should be asking my students so that we all have a great discussion about math. Otherwise, there's no point in having a great discussion. I'll just teach them how to do it, and that's faster. And that's why they all do it that way, because they don't know how to have a discussion about it, because they don't know the math that well. And I was like that for a long time. So it's like, I'm a high school teacher and I have a degree in mathematics, and I taught very procedurally for a long time. And it wasn't until I started to unpack and have these epiphanies that, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you could represent it that way, or I didn't know that you were allowed to do this type of math to do that type of math. Most teachers just don't have that comfort. So when you focus on the math first, so let's say the teachers have multiplying coming up, and we're just going to help them with strategy on multiplying today in a session, in a 2-hour release time, in a PLC, at a staff meeting. And then what happens though, when a teacher has an epiphany, when a teacher says I didn't know you could use that drawing to do that. I thought you had to stack, I thought you had to carry the 1. It's like when they have the epiphany, you're like, no, that's great. Do it again. Get comfortable with it. Here's another one. Practice it, because doing it once isn't enough. They have to do it as if imagine you gave them a math test and said, here, we want you to do this math test, and we want you to use these strategies. They have to be comfortable enough that when they go to do calculations and use number sense, they do it that way. So we have to keep, almost teach them like they're our students, so that they have that comfort. So when they have the epiphany, what always happens is it sparks the pedagogical change immediately, because they'll say, I didn't know that. And then now they feel the power of it. And then they do it again. They're like, oh my gosh, I got it right. They'll feel it. And then they go, I want to do that for my students. How do I teach this? They'll ask how to teach it. And then now you can talk pedagogy. But we always start with the math. and you always want to start with that math. So
Okay.
it's like, so your question was like, well, how best do I structure that? It will depend on like what channels and access you have, but usually the question that you can get more clarity on is, let's look at them all and let's decide that we've probably been misusing this time in the past, and we should use this time better. And we'll just make sure that we do these things to help teachers build their own confidence in mathematics.
Do you feel like there's potentially still a way to get some content work alongside knowing the buildings have already created their goals for this
Yeah,
year?
because you would just do it through that, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, so what I would do is start, anytime you're doing anything, you're going to do the math part first, and then give them the epiphany, and then tie it to productive struggle, and then tie it to like, but create the epiphany first. So decide on what strand is really important for, say, that particular grade, or say a collection of grades vertically, and then go, can I give them a math epiphany? And sometimes we don't know what a math epiphany to give them. So if that's the case, there's some good resources. I don't know if you have, say, teaching developmentally. It might not look like this. This might be the Canadian version.
I do. Yeah.
Van der Waals book.
Yeah.
You know, like the Figuring Out Fluency series from Jennifer May Williams. Like, these are all good content books. Not say, even though she has pedagogical routines built into her book, these content books give you some great insight on like trying to find these like hard to teach. That's usually the way we pick them. What's a hard to teach topic that most people just do it systematically or procedurally, and go, okay, let's unpack that, like division, or division of fractions, or adding fractions, like these things people complain about anyway. Or if there's any sort of algorithms that you're like, that's a black box algorithm, like the long division algorithm, right? It's like, does that, like, do you know that you represent it differently? And really, what you're doing a long division algorithm, you're doing repeated subtraction, but not all division is repeated subtraction. Mm-hmm. So an epiphany where people just say, oh my gosh, like this is new to me. That's what you're going for. Because when you do that, they'll not only gain the math knowledge, keep doing it, and then go, all right, here's what it could look like in a lesson. And then the lesson now highlights the math knowledge as the priority, but also connects your, say, productive struggle.
Yeah, nice. Okay. The other question I wanted to ask you is, one of the principals had asked, since his goal is on use and connect different representations. So I had mentioned that I could help with providing, like we talked about, those tasks that you can elevate. In other words, just switching the problem a little bit, like agree or disagree, why, justify your thinking kind of thing. And then like creating that context around their current content. And then he had asked if I would also provide different student solutions to that problem, so that if I was a teacher that didn't know the math for that I would have the example to then maybe try in the classroom as a teacher. So it'd be like a digital email communication. Ideally, as a math coach, my hope would be to get to be in the classroom and help with that, right? But then he's saying they would at least have a starting point to look at to potentially implement. But I don't know, that's probably not great coaching practice.
Are you asking whether you would want to provide that, or are you saying like, I don't have a resource that does that? Like,
no, I've actually looked at some of your problem-based lessons and units, and I feel like those would be great ones where you already have built some of that. So that would help me without having to get out the digital whiteboard and do it myself. But the principal is asking me to do that. And I'm kind of like, as a coach, typically we would talk through it, work through it. You know what I mean? I would question through it instead of just hand somebody it.
Okay, I get what you're saying. So is then there an opportunity for you to do that work or not?
Hopefully, it all depends on if the person, if that teacher or teachers, there's, lots of teachers, but if they would reach out and say, will you come help me implement this or try this? For sure. It does open the door for that too.
Right.
So yeah, maybe that's a positive.
Yeah. It's kind of like, we always look at it as there's a hierarchy. And this is one of the things we help guide our leaders through too, is when you're making decisions, there's a hierarchy of like the support level that you're providing, right? Like one-on-one coaching support is if you can always work that into any sort of professional development model, you opt in for that. Like it was like, let's work as much one-on-one coaching cycles. Now, why I say cycles is because you want follow-up. You want to get in there with the teacher. You want to experiment. You want to build trust. You want to kind of model, but also see what they're doing, and then almost like co-teach, and more than once, right? So it's not just a one-time only. The follow-up is accounts for 90% of the adoption. So you want to come back. You want to follow up. You want to kind of build it. That's why it's a cycle. So not, knowing that that's a cycle, that you can't do that with everyone. So you decide, can I do that with a certain amount? And then how many times can I do that throughout the year? And how many teachers can I actually do that with this year? And then being like, if I did that this year, would I be happy with that? Would those teachers move on the 3 goals that we thought were important? If so, then you make that happen. Now, if you can't let's say we're in the case where we don't have support that way, where we don't have a teacher or a co-teaching model or a coach helping in those cycles, then if you can't support through the PLC process or at the staff meetings or like any sort of other kind of touch points, then yeah, like our digital methods of support come into play at that point. And one of those, where a non-touch point, human to human touch point can be effective, is in the actual curriculum supporting documents that you have, or the curriculum that you choose. Like you're going through a selection process right now. What a good solid core foundation curriculum does is provide the resources, the exemplars, the teacher guides that kind of brings everybody up to a certain level. And then it gives you this kind of like flexibility or this confidence that if all else fails, I can turn the page on the resource and it's going to give me my next steps, as long as we select that well and it meets, our goals, and it's aligned to the objectives that we're after, that, this year, next year, for the next 5 years, it aligns to the vision that you set. Then what it also does is, because it's that foundation, it allows for teachers to go above it and go, let me grab from that and then use that instead, because that actually like fits my need better for this particular group. And you see that teachers start to supplement, but it also gives all the teachers who are new or new to the grade level that foundation that they can rely on, so that they're not grasping from nothing. So when you think about when we don't have the coaching model, we want them to have resources like that, resources where they can look at exemplars, they can look at effective teacher resource guides that guide them through that process. And you're right, like that's how we designed our resources, is to provide that kind of baseline foundation, but also focus on the things that matter, which is our resource guides are really speaking to helping a teacher not only navigate the pedagogical moves, but understand the math. So when you look at our, connecting stage or our consolidation stages in the teacher resource guide, we'll unpack the strategies, the models, like here's what a kid might do and here's what it means and this is what you should do next. So because we want the teacher to also understand the math, just so they're prepared in the classroom to deliver those connections to their students. So that can be a great tool to use if we can't be there to coach them through it. So it's not the end of the world. It's actually better than letting them just do nothing. It's about the selection of like a good resource to provide when there's a lack of one-on-one interaction, which just happens most of the time, right? Where we're not going to see majority of our teachers throughout the year.
Well, especially to be able to put the depth in where like you said, it's more than just a one time, like let's work at this or chip away at it in a cycle, more than just necessarily a one time show up and leave kind of thing. So
Good.
Okay. Well, I think, that gives me a lot of great ideas and places on where to go.
Good. Glad we can be of help here today.
Yeah, totally appreciate it. I'm excited to explore some of your resources a little bit more too. I haven't.
Yeah, if you need any other advice, let us know. If you need any other resources, like I said, we do this with schools and school districts and organizations and support them to meet their goals. And we help them we have different supporting models that work for different schools and different budget models too. So if that's of interest to you, let me know. We can share some resources there to see if you need any more support to to keep things going.
Okay, that sounds great. And I appreciate your emails too, like reading other district stories a little bit, or just like I've been getting the emails around the district improvement program for quite a while now. And every time I see one, I keep thinking, okay, I should maybe reach out and then, go back to the drawing board. And so the persistence and the breadcrumb idea of sharing what you are, I think it does help people too. Sometimes it's hard in school systems, like we just don't have any money. Like everything is going to ELA right now. So I'd love
Totally.
to be able to fully work with you in a lot, bigger, larger scope. But the reality of what we have, the
Yeah.
ability, and being a coach, I have zero control over the budget. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
makes it even
No,
harder.
we
But
get it. We get it. No worries
yeah,
there. No, we're
but
here when
totally
you're ready.
appreciate
We're here
it.
when you're ready.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, Brenda. Thanks so much.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.